Greetings, viewers. Welcome back to another podcast. This is for the Geoeconomic Strategy Unit, and we're talking about a very important topic in today's geopolitics, and that is China and its foreign relations, especially the situation that's been going on with regards to Taiwan, the South China Sea, the export spat that they've been having with the United States and beyond in Southeast Asia. So, to discuss these important elements in today's geopolitics, we have got a very special guest joining us today, a researcher who has gone in depth when it comes to the geopolitics of China. So, Suyansh, before we start, would you please like to explain to our audience your research focus and the academic angle you approach China from?
Thanks, Ishan. Thank you for having me. My name is Suyash. As you mentioned, I am a political scientist working on Chinese security and foreign affairs. I am currently a non-resident fellow with Foreign Policy Research Institute, and I focus majorly on PLA, but I focus on PLA as a body politic. So if you focus on PLA as a body politic, that means every other boundary dispute and everything that PLA does becomes a derivative. A Chinese security issue become a derivative of the PLA. So that's my major area. But I also look at nuclear security. I look at Indo-Pacific deterrence, and I also look at India-China, Indian foreign policy, etc.
That sounds great. And I think, given your focus area and the themes that we're discussing today, a good place would be to start on the military parade that China recently had, with Xi Jinping being flanked on his two sides by President Putin and Kim Jong un from North Korea. What did you think about it? We saw some new technology dominating the military parade with regards to robotics, AI, and all the frontier tech that China is trying to incorporate into its fighting force.
This is a significant military parade. This was a very significant military parade. It happened after 6 years. I remember, if I'm not wrong, such a military parade last happened in 2019, and newer weapons were displayed in 2019. So there were 6 years of time in between. The latest military parade, which happened in September, displayed a lot of development of technology on different sectors, not just nuclear. Nuclear being one, where they introduced the F-61, and observers, including myself, were surprised by the F-61 because there was not even a mention of such a technology available. We still don't know exactly what is this technology, because we knew about the F-41, which could reach the continental United States. But other technologies, we're not aware what is this. But not only this, a lot of cruise missiles, but also the emphasis on technology, AI in weaponry. So we saw a lot of weapons with technological enabled features which were displayed in this military parade. And this compels me to question whether China is at equal, or in some cases gone ahead of United States in modernization of weapons, which includes AI and other technological aspects. So this is something which is an important takeaway from this military parade. Besides this, it was also symbolically important because all the authoritarian leaders, or most authoritarian leaders, were sharing the same platform after a long time. So it was also symbolically important for giving a message to liberal world order. And most importantly, apart from this, the display of four forces: the cyber force, aerospace force, intelligence force, and networks force. All these forces were on display for the first time, messaging that these forces are coming out strong. These forces were formed in 2024, April, after the dissolution of Strategic Support Force. So this is a great leap ahead in terms of information, cyber, networks domain in military warfare.
That makes sense. Now let's talk about what the Chinese military, with all of these different elements, what are they optimizing for? What are their priorities? Are they looking at securing the India-China border? Are they gearing up for an invasion of Taiwan and essentially ensuring that all of these elements are cohesive in nature to support that? Or are they looking to militarize the South China Sea in a much deeper fashion? Or are they going directly towards Cold War 2.0 and challenging the US outright?
It would be all of the above in different capacities. So, for example, if you read Chinese military doctrine, and Professor Taylor Fravel from MIT Political Science has done great work on this. Since 1993, their primary strategic direction is Taiwan. Similarly, Katiang Tsang, also a political scientist, formerly MIT, now George Mason School, her book highlights that Tibet and Taiwan, Tibet, which includes India, so when we say Tibet, then it includes the India border, are two extremely non negotiable for China. And we have seen that, how they are behaving in that. So I would like to put it in this way. In an offensive capacity, they are preparing for a campaign in Taiwan, reunification of Taiwan. Tibet is also a non negotiable for them. If in a pecking order, first would be Taiwan, second would be Tibet, but also protection of the homeland, which is equally important. And this is being reflected in every possible white paper that they have issued over the past 20 to 25 years. Protecting the homeland, protecting their boundaries, protecting their people, all these things are equally important for them. Besides that, if you see 2013 and 2015 white papers, their interest as a country grows economically, diplomatically, and militarily, their interests also expands. So from 2013 2015, they are not only talking about brown water and they are talking about blue waters right now. I'll explain these concepts. When you talk about brown water, you talk about the waters, oceans that are near your territory, that are near your coast. For example, Indian Ocean, Northern Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal would be brown waters for India. In case of China, Yellow Sea, South China Sea, East China Sea, these are brown waters. But their official papers are talking about protecting the interests in blue water. This means they are talking about protecting their interests in Northern Indian Ocean and Western Pacific Ocean. And these are not only paper talks. This is backed by development of capabilities by the PLA Navy. So if you see PLA Navy, at least in terms of numbers, is the biggest navy in the world. And they are slowly expanding and going outwards. They have created a Djibouti naval base in 2017. We're talking about a possible naval base in Cambodia. They have a lot of arrangements with Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bangladesh, where they could port their vessels. You see increasing number of research vessels coming into the Indian Ocean. You see the increasing number of permanent placement of naval vessels into Indian Ocean region. So these are slow, steady, expanding interest. So to summarize what I have said, they are not just thinking about protection of their own homeland. That's number one. They are thinking about protecting their interests in their brown waters. That's number two. Taiwan and Tibet are non-negotiables. That's number three. Taiwan is their primary strategic direction. Tibet, which includes the India border, is their secondary strategic direction. But they are also thinking of expanding into blue waters. And they are thinking of expanding into domains which are not touched before. These include space, network, cyber. As the cliche goes, the next war would be in the space. So first, whoever protects their own interest in the space would be the winner. So protection and expansion. This is how I would like to put it.
All important points. And one thing that I could draw a parallel to when I was doing my dissertation for my master's at King's, I focused on the Belt and Road Initiative with a particular emphasis on dual use infrastructure. And that's an important point you highlighted, essentially talking about how, as the Chinese economic interests expand worldwide, because now they're the world's largest debt collector with more than $1 trillion in outstanding debt, most of it owed to African countries for infrastructure projects, etc., where they ship Chinese workers to work on those infrastructure projects. And when you do that, the Navy has essentially outlined that it is an important strategic area for them to protect China's overseas economic interests, which are growing by the day. I just wanted to talk to you about the political aspects of the PLA and the military doctrine as a whole. How cohesively is the political leadership influencing this? Or is it a two-way street where the army is influencing the political bureau as well?
This is a very tricky question. That's because theoretically, PLA is party's army. So PLA is not a national army like the Indian army, which is the army of the Indian government. But PLA is CCP's army. So CCP is and will have the final say over the PLA. And this is reflective of all the sackings that is happening recently. You see in the past 3 4 years, the amount of leaders, PLA military leaders that are being sacked, which is huge. So officially on paper, that's true. But as in any organization, so you are a student of international relations, you must have seen that in the United Nations, when it was formed and what it is today are two very different things because the organization grows. The organizational theory says that it grows over a period of time. It requires the life, it requires the bureaucracy of its own. Same with the PLA. PLA would be completing 100 years in 1.5 years' time or in 2027. So the organization has grown and it has grown in multiple directions. So there is always this tension that exists between PLA and the CCP. But CCP will always have the final say and the final word over the army. But tensions does exist in these cases.
That's right. And how would that transpire when it comes to a potential military incursion into Taiwan? Are we looking at it going forward? What's the political side thinking? And is the military, the army essentially, in cohesion on that front? Or are they having tensions as you just highlighted?
They are in cohesion. Tensions manifest itself in different ways. So, for example, there are different cliques that are being formed into the PLA. So, there is a Fujian clique, there is a Shanghai clique, there is a equipment department clique. These are different departments within the PLA. There is a Air Force department clique, and this affects the recruitment. This also affects promotions, which in turn affects the capability to perform on the ground. And this will affect any campaign, be it the India border campaign, be it the Taiwan campaign. The Taiwan campaign would not be affected if CCP decides that we are going to invade Taiwan tomorrow and PLA will say no. That is not going to happen. But performance would be affected because over a period of time, because the organization has got its own life, there are certain leaders who would always give preference to certain people, which is in every organization. Merit has been affected. And this is how performance gets affected in case of PLA.
That makes sense. And how are other countries factoring all of this in? I mean, if we look at Southeast Asia, they've been having tensions with China in the South China Sea for a number of years now. With regards to Taiwan, we saw tensions spiking up with Japan to an unprecedented degree in recent days, looking at the speed with which that escalation happened, at least on a diplomatic level. So, what are your thoughts on how other countries, especially in the immediate neighborhood of China, are reacting to these developments?
I mean, you have to pick your battles, right? China is a very big country. It's the second biggest power, second biggest military, second biggest economy. So you cannot keep on fighting with them all the time. At least India is a big country. India is capable of doing that. But Japan, it picks its battle. So, for example, not necessarily all the time there is a diplomatic tussle that happens. You have to pick which subject is of utmost interest to you. Similarly, in South China Sea, in case of ASEAN Code of Conduct, not all ASEAN countries are united. For any code of conduct, you need a unity within all the ASEAN countries. There are problems. They pick their battles. For example, in case of South China Sea, the Philippines picks its battle in case of territorial dispute. Vietnam picks its battle in case of territorial disputes within the South China Sea. But that is not necessarily true in case of economy. That is not necessarily true in case of diplomacy. So you have to pick what are the non-negotiables for you. So, for example, in case of the Philippines in South China Sea, you see what is happening for the past 2-3 years. You see how they are pushing back with their coast guard. But that's not true. If you go to Philippines, the Chinese economic influence on the country is too high. So these countries have decided where to push the envelope in case of China, which is what is manifesting in case of Japan as well in East China Sea and ASEAN countries in South China Sea.
And how are they trying to balance? Because if they see that China is, of course, an immediate challenger at the moment, I mean, you really have to counterbalance that if you look at it from a realist international relations lens. How do you balance that power? Are they swinging from a military structural standpoint towards the US? Are they bandwagoning together in one cohesive unit? Or are individual countries looking to find new partners elsewhere that can help them provide a ballast against China?
If you want to balance a bigger power, there are only two ways theoretically to balance a bigger power. You have to bandwagon yourself with a different bully. That's point number one, which they are trying to do. And you have to build your capabilities, homegrown capabilities. ASEAN is not capable of balancing China within themselves because there is no unity. Cambodia will go in different direction. Laos will go in different direction. Thailand will swing from east to west. So that's not possible. So you have to bring outside actors. You have to bring regional powers within the equation. And that includes India up to an extent, but I don't think India is capable of operating in that region. It has to be the United States. It has to be Quad together. The problem right now is Quad is looking in different direction. There is no unity since past 1 year. That's a big problem. Otherwise, Quad would have been a great tool for these countries to balance China. But United States per se, that's the only answer. And build your own capabilities. I mean, improve your economy, build your own capabilities defense wise, where you give the time for outside countries to come in. Particularly if you talk case to case specific basis, in case of South China Sea, build more vessels, build more maritime militia, which could take on the Chinese militia. See, it is not comparable because Chinese armor is huge, but still you will be able to give a fight. You have to build your capabilities and bring an outside bully into the equation.
That's definitely become harder with the Trump administration coming in because their risk appetite towards China is definitely different from what these countries have been used to in the past. Now we saw the trade tensions between the US and China again flare up to an unprecedented level. And the speed at which the negotiations were conducted, oftentimes yielding fruitful results, oftentimes not. But we were able to measure the temperature that the overall outlook was essentially more towards diplomacy, more towards negotiating, rather than extend this into a more serious economic war, trade war, or even a military confrontation on any front, especially when it comes to Taiwan. So, how do you think the US is reacting to these developments in Southeast Asia? Because they know that China is definitely their biggest challenger now. Again, going back to the Cold War 2.0 point that I brought up earlier.
I think all those things that you pointed out, it happened because the cost for the United States is too high. I mean, in case of Russia, the cost was not so high because the economies were not so much integrated with each other. The cost for Europe in case of Russia was very high. But in case of China, because the economies are so integrated, a lot of trade that passes through that region, and the collateral damage in case of any escalation would be so high. And that is why you always see two steps ahead, one step back in case of China US relations. How is US reacting to Southeast Asian countries? They're trying to support, at least before this administration, they were trying to take them on as a partners, if not allies. Some of them are allies as well. The problem with this administration is that there is no consistency in this administration, as we saw in Trump 1.0, where allies and partners are completely alienated, and which is going to cost them dear. I mean, you tell them to take their own responsibilities, and these countries are clearly not capable of taking their own responsibilities while facing China. One good thing because of that is these countries have started investing in their own defenses more. For example, if you see Japan, Japan has increased its defense spending slowly and steadily. Similarly, some of these countries are investing in their defense spending to take on China in this region. But the lack of consistencies and assurances with alliances and partners is a very slippery slope to walk on in case of these maritime issues.
Pretty much. And do you not think going forward, because this has been such an engaging conversation that people would want to end on a forward looking note, this is one of China's biggest advantages. I mean, if you look at how other countries strategize in terms of election cycles and what government policies change in those 5 years or 4 years, China has this ability to plan not for 2, 3 election cycles, but for 2, 3 generations ahead, given the leadership structure within the CCP and China broadly. So, how is that impacting the situation on the ground? Do you think that's a big advantage that China has, and how might it materialize going forward?
I think there are always advantages in democracy. I would always support a democracy over an authoritarian regime. I know there is a cost. For example, economic reforms. The kind of economic reforms that China did in past 30 years are extraordinary. And would that be possible in case of a democracy? You look at India. India took time to do these reforms. But whenever it comes from a place of a consent, and whenever there are democratic institutions backing those reforms, the excesses are being reduced out of the equation. And that is why I would always be inclined towards democratic reforms more than an authoritarian regime reforms, because your voice is being curtailed. But yes, China definitely has an advantage. There is no doubt about this. I mean, the kind of things that China could do, no other country has done in the past. But there is also a flip side, which we saw during the COVID, right? When push comes to shove, people wake up, and that is where you have to completely roll back on all your policies, which you saw in case of a COVID lockdown. And then in such scenarios, the regime is always insecure. And then this insecurity can lead to different things. So yes, they are able to do a lot of different things in case of military, economy, AI, diplomacy, technology, and all other spheres. But I would always be inclined towards doing it democratically so that there is a consent, there is a populist backing to this.
That's a very wise way of looking at it. But going forward, what's the one big thing you would ask people to watch out for?
I mean, more than one, I would say there are two or three big aspects. The most important aspect that everybody should look out for is China's investment in AI. And then AI would not only be military applications, but everything. So that's the most important aspect. Second would be China in the space. The kind of technologies that they are developing in space, cyber, is something that everybody should take a lesson from, including India. So that's the second important aspect that I would ask people to look out for. And third is just follow the party. Because in case of China, there are two structures. One is party, one is the government. Generally, people follow the government and then they miss out on important topics. If you follow the party, you will get a lot of insight of what is happening and its implication for national security. You just follow the party and you'll get all the answers to your questions.
That's novel insight right there. And this has been a theme throughout this conversation, if I might say, novel insights. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It was lovely speaking with you. Very engaging discussion indeed. One of the best I've had by far. So look forward to continuing our engagement with you and keeping a tab on all of these things that you have pointed out for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ishan. Thank you for having me.